staff, together with several collaborators, demonstrated how it is possible to steal some paragraphs from state bureaucrats in order to discard them and make free economic space free for innovators, entrepreneurs, and investors. We strongly support innovators, entrepreneurs, and investors because they are the only ones who could lead us toward the fourth industrial revolution and OECD membership. That is our vision, which you can see on the book cover. Good evening. Welcome to Free Market Road Show, which will try to answer why some countries such as United States and China are good in marshalling creative destruction and others such as Bosnia and Herzegovina are not. I am happy to greet you on behalf of Sarajevo School of Science and Technology, SSST, who is proud to host yet another Free Market Road Show, as it has been doing since the Free Market Road Show was initiated in 2008. First, let me introduce myself. My name is Vjekoslav Domljan from SSST, and I will be moderating the event. This event will start with 15 minutes keynote speech, then at 15 minutes, panel introductory statements will follow. Each panelist will give a short presentation that they have pre-prepared. This will be followed by a 30 minutes session of either question from audience or alternatively from me. Question and answer discussion can be placed into the chat box during presentation. And now our keynote speaker, Peter Jungen. Peter Jungen is the chairman of Peter Jungen Holding. Peter is much more than business angel. Peter is one of founders of European Business Angels Network and China Business Angels Network, and a member of New York Angels. In 2019, the last Nobel year, Nobel Prize laureate Edmund Phelps, economist I appreciate very much, was delivering dinner remarks at Peter's birthday party. However, on this occasion, we will be enjoying while Peter will be delivering. I would like ask Peter to present his keynote. Peter, the Zoom floor is yours.
Hello, thank you for having me here at your beautiful conference on innovation and on the foundations of innovation. So this is what I'm going to speak about. Without innovation, there would be no growth and no wealth in the world. Innovation is the key driver of economic growth and modern development in the world. All growth in the last 250 years or so is based on innovation. Maybe 100,000 years ago, the humans appeared in the world. Nothing very much happened for the almost 100,000 years. And it was only in the last few hundred years when things started to move and to change. More than 200 years of technological innovation has driven economic development. The process of innovation involves complementary contributions from scientists, from entrepreneurs, financial markets, investment communities, and from governments. To quote Karl Popper in The Poverty of Historicism, if there is such a thing as growing human knowledge, then we cannot anticipate today what will only we know tomorrow. So the world economy is a future open system. What happened in the world is based on innovation and has contributed to that growth. For 100,000 years, nothing much, therefore, happened in this world. It is basically only, as I said, in these last centuries that things started to work. And the world is basically working since then on experimentation rather than only working from experience. It is the Enlightenment, which is basically the driving force of innovation. The great divergence in the world was between the end of the 18th century and 50 or so years ago. Since then, we see a real revolution in the world, the revolution of innovation. The only justification for capitalism is economic dynamism. And economic dynamism is based on innovation. For innovation of research and development, entrepreneurs as transfer agents, and the driving force of knowledge, entrepreneurs and risk-taking investors. Therefore, it is very important that we understand capitalism as an innovation economy. This is it all about. Entrepreneurial culture and freedom to choose. Capitalism answers the questions why many people in the world are better off than other people in other countries. According to Schumpeter, capitalism is the force behind all human development. Entrepreneurial capitalism has brought prosperity and wealth, not only for a few, but for billions of people. So the only justification for capitalism is economic dynamism. There is no other justification. So what is needed for innovation? The answer is, it is research and development executed by scientists shaping invention. And it is entrepreneurs who, as transfer agents and for financing of innovation. So the driving forces for innovation are knowledge, entrepreneurs, and risk-taking investors. Knowledge comes from experimentation rather than from experience. Therefore, we are talking about the relentless search, discovery, speculation, wealth creation, winner culture, and the failure culture. So we have the difference between invention and innovation, whereas invention is turning money into knowledge, innovation is turning knowledge back into money. So in the modern times, entrepreneurship as a driving force of innovation is a function, not a class, what many people have not understood until today. In capitalism, people could become entrepreneurs before they have funds. So capitalism is not about rich people. Capitalism is about eventually making people rich. Therefore, the question is, what role for governments? In the invention part, through financing of R&D, in education in particular, in early childhood education, secondary schools and university, proper framework conditions for entrepreneurship, startups, and finance of innovation. Therefore, it is so important to understand this role of governments. It is a key role, but it's a limited role. Governments can create entrepreneurship-friendly environments and make sure that the right institutions are in place, like the rule of law and property rights. Small government is important in terms of a low percentage of government spending of GDP. Free market, protecting ownership, a favorable non-discriminatory taxation, education, financing of innovation, encouraging of startups, and entrepreneurial role models through particular in the part of and relationship to migration. In the experience and practice in many countries shows that it is not the invisible hand of government, invisible hands of markets we see, according to Adam Smith. It is rather the two visible hands of governments which create problems. Successful economic countries have a high level of entrepreneurship culture. a high startup rate and have a winner and failure culture at the same time. Therefore, at the heart of entrepreneurship are fast-growing startups. Without entrepreneurship, there would be no innovation. So the difference between invention and innovation is, as I said before, turning money into knowledge, or innovation is turning knowledge back into money. But now, the interesting part is innovation is really more important than trade and globalization. It's a driver of trade and globalization. It is, if you look back on the world, in the history of the Second World War, after the Second World War, since 1960s, more than 40 countries in the world have grown with 7% over a 10-year period or even longer. 35 of those are non-democracies. But the countries who have grown to over $10,000 per capita were all are now democracies. So maybe China is going to be a different thing. Maybe it's the first country which grows for a long period of time and growing over $10,000, and maybe still it's on the way to a democracy or not. We will see. In the last 18th century, without the exception of 2 centuries, Asia was always 50% of world GDP, and is the only last 200th century which makes a difference. So the global innovation has some interesting news. The first 60 to 70 countries in the Global Innovation Index are basically countries who have democracy and capitalism. The next 30 countries are so-so. So we face a very, very interesting couple of years ahead of us, whether the role model of capitalism within democracy will prevail or whether we will see changes. 200 years ago, 85% of the world population lived in extreme poverty with less than $1.25 a day. Free enterprise capitalism has created prosperity not just for a few, but for billions of people everywhere. That is, I think, the key to understand what is the real difference between other parts of the world and other systems who basically, until now, all failed. The only system which still has prevailed is capitalism, or is rather, I would even say, market, is innovation economy. One more important factor for is the financing of innovation, is the financing of startups, and is therefore the way how to produce the fund and give entrepreneurs funds before they are rich. If we wait that until entrepreneurs are rich, the world will stay poor. The key role for understanding of financing of innovation is venture capital, but even more important is the role of business angels. Business angels are uncovered, under-researched, underestimated, unknown, undervalued, and overtaxed. All in the US, 60 to 70% of all technology-based startups are financed by business angels. They invest entrepreneurial experience, their network and contact, and their know-how. And that is what makes the difference to any other type of investors. Angel investing is pretty risky. Most startups fail. 70% do not survive the first 5 years. So angels invest in the majority of failures. So you need a pretty high failure culture and a high failure resistance to be in that business. The Chinese always use the word now of the mass entrepreneurship and mass innovation. Prime Minister Li Ka-shing favors these words from the book of our friend Edmund Phelps, the 2006 Nobel laureate, on his book on mass innovation. I think this is so important to understand that this is a bottom-up thing. Entrepreneurship and innovation is the most important NGO in the world. Let me come to a few more points which are important in this dynamism. There is the role of IPOs, as we said, that is bringing companies to the market. But before that, you have the IP, and it's not before that the IP is before IPO. It is the IP, intellectual property, which is very important, and it plays a particular role if you see the present health sector and vaccines. It is so important that there is the protection of IPO for those who have developed in an incredible short period of time proper vaccines to start off and to fight the pandemic which we are facing. But before that, they have invested for years in this new technology, and therefore it is so important that that they are protected. This is where other people will find the proper way. Now, where is the place for Europe in all that scenario? Europe seems to be losing pace. Europe seems to be on the losing end. When we see, for instance, capital market development in the last 10 years or so, you could see that the world market cap portion of the US is almost 60%, the market cap of all listed companies. China is now 5%, and Germany is 2.5%. Europe is losing in importance on that. Similar is if you see the largest market companies by the largest market cap. Years ago, it was the US companies in oil and gas, and now is the tech companies in the world, which are the largest one. And out of the 8 of the largest are US and 2 are in China. If you see the largest companies in, it's only Chinese, US and Chinese in the internet business. Therefore, we are not making up, we are losing out. Among the largest in the world with market cap, there are 8 Americans and 2 Chinese. And as I said, among the 20 largest internet firms are 12 from the US, 7 in China, and 1 from Japan. The largest market cap in the world, the first European is on the place of 1819. The largest German is on about 50. And the second largest German is on 98. So we're not looking very good. If you look on the corona measures of the governments, the interesting thing is, if you look for the word innovation, you won't find it 0. If you there once is the word of product innovation, the word founder and startups is only in the context of giving shares to staff. But obviously, they even take the shares of a company, and the politicians think the staff takes shares in the company without the company ever existing. And give me one more observation. The big advantage for Chinese firms in the innovation is they have no baggage from the past, and therefore they move very fast. And there's the famous economist, car driver, Sterling Moss once said that if you think you have everything under control, maybe you are simply not driving fast enough. And it looks like that is true for what we see in the world going on and in Europe. There's one, and let me finally close on a more upbeat note. We see venture capital in the first month of this year. Last year, we saw a pretty steady, much more to the late end, much more less to early stage and less for angel investors. But in the first 3 months of this year, we have seen a drastic and dramatic change. We see a particular strong increase in the world. Globally, almost more than 120 billion US dollars. We are off, obviously, to the best year in venture capital ever. But still, early stage is down, angel is down, late is up. But if you look on the first quarter of this year, we're off to a dramatic start. We have the highest quarter ever in venture capital since on records. And in the world is about 126 globally, billion. And in the US, out of this is almost 70%. So more than 50% is in the US. Europe has the highest quarter ever. Also, but of course, almost 50% of that is in the UK. Germany has its highest quarter ever. Israel has its highest quarter ever. And China has its third highest quarter on record. So what we see is that it looks like dynamism is back. Dynamism is what the world economy needs after Corona. But the important thing is to keep this going. Unfortunately, in some European countries, startups are treated as badly as children, or you could say children as badly as startups. The two most important ingredients for this future of our countries are young people, and the most important ingredients for the economy is startups. Both are treated badly under Corona. So we have to come up and to change this dramatically. What we will see is Europe is in a decline, definitely relatively. Whether that is in absolute terms depends very much on us and depends very much on what we are going to do in our countries after Corona. Thank you very much for having listened to me. And it was really a great pleasure to be with you again. And all the best to the Hayek Institute. Thank you.
Peter, for these provoking views, we can understand a little bit better why only 9 European countries, 7 of them being from Southeast Europe, still not high-income countries. We can understand what the reasons are. Low R&D, lack of investors and innovators, and big and inefficient government. Now, it's my great privilege to welcome our panelists. Our first panelist is John Chisholm. John is Chief Executive Officer of John Chisholm Ventures. He has 3 decades of experience as an entrepreneur and investor. He is past president and chair of Worldwide MIT Alumni Association. John will be talking about Silicon Valleys in Bosnia and Herzegovina. Mr. Chisholm.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me? It is a wonderful pleasure to be back with you. The last time I was in Sarajevo was in May of 2013. It was my first free market roadshow event ever. So it is a special treat to be back, and it brings back such fond memories. I wish I could be there in person. And also, I'm a trustee of MIT, and so I'm sending greetings from the Massachusetts Institute of Technology to the Sarajevo School of Science and Technology. Well, before I start my talk, I'd just like to acknowledge 4 highlights of Peter Jungen's wonderful keynote, for me anyway, and that is that economic growth has been driven by innovation since the Industrial Revolution, that it's more important, innovation is more important than trade, because without trading for innovation and just say lower costs, many of the benefits of trading across borders would be reduced. It requires an ecosystem, and I'll say a great deal about that in the next few minutes. And finally, my favorite quote from Peter's talk, which is, capitalism is not about rich people, it's about eventually making all of us rich. So, Peter, thank you very much for those insights. I had originally planned to, there we go, call this talk How to Create Silicon Valleys in Bosnia, but for two reasons, I changed that to Innovation Ecosystems. One, the success of Silicon Valley is very specific to Silicon Valley, as I'll say a few words about in just a moment. And two, in many ways, what's happening in the state of California is not a role model for Bosnia or anyone else to follow right now. We see a large exodus of professionals from Silicon Valley. And so Bosnia needs and wants to discover its own unique approach to innovation ecosystems, and that's what I'll be talking about today. Many of the ideas in this talk will have come from my book, Unleash Your Inner Company, in particular, Chapter 25 and Appendix E, and so there's more detail in both of those. For the last, actually 40 years, I've had the privilege of living in a very exciting place, Silicon Valley in Northern California. This is the San Francisco Peninsula with some of the leading companies here. Over the last 40 years, I've started, grown, and sold multiple companies, worked for large and small companies alike, invested in many others. Some of these have succeeded, some of these have failed. So I've had very broad and deep exposure to Silicon Valley over the last 40 years. What are the key features of Silicon Valley? Well, first of all, there are plenty of entrepreneurs, and this is partly cultural, who have the freedom and incentive to discover, create, and satisfy customer needs. There's the freedom to self-organize, both individuals and companies, individuals who can freely move from company to company, and companies who spin out, trade, and position themselves and compete with each other. We hear most about the successes, but actually for every success, there are many more failures. And this is good because every failure means there's learning and adaptation. It's the younger companies that tend to drive the growth of the region. The larger companies tend to grow by acquiring larger companies, but it is the dynamic younger companies that are less than, say, 5 or 10 years old that drive most of the economic growth and employment growth in the region. There's capital from many sources available to fund these risky ventures. And finally, technical universities are key to enhance human capital. In Silicon Valley, it's Berkeley and Stanford. Of course, in Sarajevo, it's SSST. Next slide, please. To give an example of how innovation ecosystems are self-organizing, imagine the network of supply chains among all the different companies in the region or across the world. It's constantly changing. Companies are constantly evaluating new sources and suppliers and changing who they collaborate with and compete with. And it is a dynamic, ephemeral network that couldn't possibly be planned. No board or council or government has the knowledge that is embedded in all of those different organizations to optimize and continuously refine those innovation ecosystems and those supply chains. Innovation ecosystems are an example of what are called complex adaptive systems. And here are 4 other examples: rainforests, the stock exchange, changes markets, and the human brain. What are complex adaptive systems? Well, the 2 key things that characterize them is that order arises bottom up from agents. It could be buyers and sellers, it could be species, it could be neurons in the brain, who are all self-organizing. That's the adaptive part, not from top-down design. The systems are always innovating and evolving thanks to variation and selection. They are never at equilibrium, despite what they taught us in Econ 101. People are constantly entering the economy, leaving the economy. New products are constantly entering. Oops, I didn't mean to jump ahead that quickly. If we could go back to the last slide, please. There are feedback loops which give rise to nonlinearity and unpredictability. For example, network effects are a form of feedback loops that drive the incredible rapid growth of companies like Facebook and Google. And if you try to constrain such systems from the top down, you get unintended consequences. So all of those are features of complex adaptive systems. If you'd like to learn more about them, the Santa Fe Institute in Santa Fe, New Mexico is the world-leading research center in complex adaptive systems. And Brian Arthur, one of their faculty, just wrote a wonderful article called The Economics as Nouns and Verbs, which pays homage to the Austrian School of Economics. Next, please. So given all of that, don't try to plan, design, or control your innovation ecosystem. This chart shows the growth of Silicon Valley over the last century. No one could have predicted that wireless radio would give rise to vacuum tubes, would give rise to instruments, semiconductors, and so forth, up to the innovations we're seeing in the present day. At best, you can see innovations, how they will evolve maybe 2 or 3 years in advance. But that's about it. The winning companies and even industries tend to be recognized late, even by venture capitalists who have a very strong incentive to predict the right winning companies. And of course, most VC investments are failures, as has been mentioned. Silicon Valley's growth has been leveling off, and during the pandemic, people had the opportunity to leave the area. Many of them chose to do so. It's very expensive, thanks to zoning. 80% of San Francisco is zoned for 40 feet. It's a compact area surrounded by water on 3 sides, and that hugely limits the amount of real estate, and that makes it more expensive to live there and to open offices there. Also, it's a heavily regulated environment from many standpoints. I can say more about that. And all of these factors have caused many people and companies in Silicon Valley to shift to Austin, Texas, and other parts of the United States. So we hear a lot about industrial policy. I was in Poland when they were trying to create an ecosystem very specific to drones. It's not likely to be successful. We cannot predict how the ecosystem can emerge. All we can do is create a climate and environment that attracts lots of entrepreneurs and companies. And that brings me to my next series of slides, which are a model for innovation ecosystems. We start with the number of entrepreneurs generated with the region and attracted from outside the region. The number generated is the number who start to grow companies as opposed the net number, as opposed to those who quit to do something else. And the net number attracted from outside is the ones who come in from elsewhere and the ones who leave to go elsewhere. So in Silicon Valley, a great many of the entrepreneurs come from outside. There's a net positive there. And something to think about for Bosnia is, what would it take to for Bosnia and for entrepreneurs around the world who currently have the mindset, where I really need to be successful with my new venture, Silicon Valley? What would it take to create the mindset in those entrepreneurs that where I really need to be successful is in Bosnia? So that successful entrepreneurs wanted to come to Bosnia from all over the world. Okay, so next, please. As I mentioned, cultural and societal factors are drivers here. It has to be okay to fail. Most of the entrepreneurs in Silicon Valley who have started successful companies have worked for other companies or started other companies that failed before their successes. So a failure is just a path, a necessary, in some cases, path to success. Next, this gives rise to the total number of entrepreneurs in the region. And that number is amplified or de-amplified by factors like the universities, the infrastructure, the degree to which regulation of the region is limited. And it does seem that geographical compactness helps entrepreneurship, maybe because entrepreneurs can interact with each other. Ideas can spread more rapidly in compact areas. We see both Silicon Valley and Boston, the other major, second largest innovation ecosystem in the US, are surrounded by water on three sides. Next, all of this gives rise to entrepreneurial economic activity. And you can see that there's a feedback loop. The more activity, the more it attracts more entrepreneurs and so forth. So how can we get such a feedback loop going in Bosnia is the question to think about. And for that question, I want to focus on the two specific items circled in red here: the relative attractiveness of Bosnia to other regions, and two, the limited amount of regulation. And one metric that addresses both of these, which I think is tremendously useful, is the World Bank Ease of Doing Business Index. Next slide, please. And here the World Bank Doing Business rankings. Each year, the World Bank ranks 190 different economies around the world from number 1, the easiest to do business in, to number 190, the most difficult to do business in. So it's a really useful tool. Let's take a look at it. Well, first of all, here's a picture of me with the creator of the World Bank Ease of Doing Business Index, Simeon Jankov. He's from Bulgaria, not too far away from Bosnia. And if you have an opportunity to invite him to SSST, it would be, I think, a very worthwhile activity. So let's take a look at the ranking. So here are the first, are all 190 countries. You can see number 1 is New Zealand, number 2 is Singapore. Sadly, the United States is currently at number 6. When the ranking was created in 2005, we were number 3. Bosnia and Herzegovina, you can see, is at number 90. So it's not really bad. It is in the top half. That's good. But still, there's a tremendous amount of room for improvement. And regretfully, it's down one notch from 2019, where you ranked 89. So the beauty of the World Bank Ease of Doing Business Index is it tells you exactly what you're doing well and where you need to improve. And here, for example, are 10 different metrics that the overall ranking comprises. And on these 10 different dimensions, like how easy is it to start a business, to deal with construction permits, get electricity, register property, and so forth, it ranks each region, each country on these individual dimensions, and then comes up with a composite. So where is Bosnia doing well? Well, in the last two items there, the green one and the brownish one, you can see trading across borders and resolving bankruptcy. For those dimensions, Bosnia ranks is the 27th best and the 37th best. So that's good. Keep doing that. Probably, I'm guessing, much of that benefit is inherited by being part of the European Union. Now, where are the greatest opportunities for improvement for Bosnia? Well, on the left side, you'll see the scores that are the lowest. Starting a business is an abysmal 184 out of 190. That's worse than many of the dictatorships in Africa that generally tend to be lowest on the Ease of Doing Business Index. Dealing with construction permits, 173. So, of course, this metric, and there's a detailed report that goes with this from the World Bank. You can find it online, read about it, learn about how you can improve. Possibly this only refers to the administrative aspects of starting a business, the forms that you have to register with the government. If so, that can easily be dealt with. It probably doesn't as easily doesn't include as much of how hard it is to get the business up and running after you've started it. And so even if you improve your score on the administrative aspects of starting a business, don't stop there. Keep going to make sure it's easy to start and grow a business from all the other aspects. And so given this tool, what would be a good goal for Bosnia that would be aggressive, achievable, and measurable? Well, I would say a goal that's achievable, aggressive, and measurable is to cut your rank in half in the next 3 years. So you're currently at 90, and that would be jumping to 45 3 years from now. And okay, so that's a difference of 45 positions. That means roughly jumping by 15 positions per year. That is very achievable. India went from 130 to 100 in 1 year. There are many other countries who, by a concerted effort, have made very significant jumps like that in 1 year. Bosnia can do the same. The number of positions you jump in the first year should be more than in the second and third year, because it should be easier to make progress with the less competitive countries that are immediately ahead of you than the other countries that are closer to the top. And then what would be an appropriate long-term goal for Bosnia? Well, it should be to be number one on the World Bank Ease of Doing Business Index. There's no reason Bosnia could not be number one. New Zealand, a small country, relatively isolated in the South Pacific, is number one currently. Bosnia can do the same. So those are some thoughts, and it's wonderful again to be here with you. Thanks so much for having me. I'm looking forward to the discussion afterwards. Thank you.
Thank you, John. We know better how to establish enterprise-based innovation system. In Peter's presentation, we had two very important words, innovation and invention. But one word was not mentioned, that is imitation. What does it mean? It means when there is a low-income country, in order to become middle-income country, it's necessary to imitate, and that would be enough. But if a country such as Bosnia and Herzegovina, which is even upper middle-income country, to become high-income country is necessary to innovate. But we already mentioned that in Bosnia, the government is pretty big and inefficient. So the challenge is how to establish enterprise-based innovation system. Perhaps we will talk a little bit later about this in some details. Let me present our next panelist, Krisztina Pusok. Krisztina is the Director of Policy and Research at the American Consumer Institute Center for Citizen Research. Krisztina will provide a high-level policy perspective about the role of IP protections and how government regulation shape the innovation climate. Dr. Pusok.
Thank you, Vjekoslav. Thank you for the kind introduction, and hello to everyone. It's a pleasure to be here with you all. I want to take a little bit of time to talk about the theme more from a high-level policy perspective, specifically focusing on the role of IP protections and how government regulations shape the innovation climate. Whatever we've been able to achieve in the last year with COVID, And yes, it was first enabled by great science and amazing people working around the clock. But they were able to do that because they were backed by the security of IP rights, which has secured their investments of time, research, and money. So I do find it very mind-boggling when, with all the plethora of evidence pointing towards all the economic and societal benefits that strong IP protections are conducive to, there's still resistance and even a push, well, mainly from politicians and governments, to undermine this key pillar that is conducive to the technologies and innovations that we all benefit from today. So why is that? I believe part of the problem is a fundamental misunderstanding of what innovation is. The invention is incentivized and supported by intellectual property, but once the invention happens, the rest is easy. People will come knocking at your door, wanting your product, and the invention then miraculously finds its way to us, the consumers or patients, and we don't really need IP rights once this is achieved. Well, I do think this is a very completely flawed interpretation, because innovation is a long, multi-phase process and also a very costly process, which takes billions of dollars in investments. And I mean, this is something that I'm sure John can attest to. And I do want to be clear, IP protection is not a guarantee of success. Instead, it is the security that if the invention is successful, there will be a return on the investment made. So take drug development, for example, which is, I mean, it's characterized by a very high failure rate of over 90% and a lot of wasted investments. But even when you have invention, the process doesn't stop there, because you need to develop a product that consumers can use. And then getting the product to consumers is also it's a very challenging process. Manufacturing it at scale, it's not an easy proposition. And this is something that we've seen with the COVID-19 vaccines. So each step in this process will require investments, which in turn is backed by IP. I do want to emphasize that intellectual property is a necessary but not sufficient condition conducive to an innovative climate, which brings me to my next point. The rule of law needs to prevail for the IP to do its job, but policymakers need to also understand that the laws and regulations don't happen in a vacuum. We tend to often forget that regulations come with costs and trade-offs. And actually, to Peter's point, it is often the visible hand of government which creates the problems. He mentioned that Europe is falling behind because of how governments there are treating startups. And we do see some very stringent regulations popping up in Europe. For example, the EU General Data Protection Regulation, also known as the GDPR, that although it targeted large tech companies, it disproportionately affected small companies and startups by placing additional burdens on them. To be even more specific, there is some research from the National Bureau of Economic Research, which found that venture capital investments in small and micro companies decreased by $3 million per week following GDPR's enactment, and that GDPR costs up to 30,000 new jobs due to the decreased investment and startup activity. So I do want to conclude by emphasizing what Peter mentioned, that the government plays a key role, but it should be a limited role. We know that regulations don't evolve as quickly as technological change. And while we do need laws and regulations to provide protections for consumers, think of privacy or cybersecurity. it would be more efficient and beneficial for everyone if regulators would work together with the industry and academia to develop those rules and standards while not hampering innovation. And with that, Vjekoslav, thank you.
Krisztina, it was very nice to listen about the issue of appropriability. Why to be an entrepreneur or investor or innovator if I cannot reap my rewards? And that is the market should decide what is the reward, not the government. That is the problem. But we will talk about it later on. And finally, Nađa Zupčević. Nađa is the last but a tremendously important panelist. Nađa is a young innovator currently working as a project manager at the Center for Civil Society Promotion in Bosnia and Herzegovina. She is a member of Association of Innovators in Bosnia and Herzegovina. Nađa will refer to the situation in Bosnia and Herzegovina and what problems innovators in Bosnia face when they want to patent their innovations. She will also list the most common mistakes the innovators make, which she made an opportunity to notice as a member of Innovations Association Bosnia and Herzegovina. Nađa, please.
So thank you. I hope that you can hear me. First of all, I like to thank you for the invitation. For me, it's a great honor and pleasure to talk about this important topic with experienced experts, as we have had the opportunity to hear. So I can talk about intellectual property from my point of view as an innovator and as a member of the Inventors Association of Bosnia and Herzegovina, and as a project manager implementing the project treasury of Bosnia and Herzegovina Innovation. So when it comes to Bosnia and Herzegovina, I would like to point out some of the following things when it comes to intellectual property. Is that BNH only invests 0.2% of GDP when it comes to innovation and research. And we know that European average is 3%. When I launched my innovation in 2016, and when I was searching more about the intellectual property, about patenting my innovation, and as talking to other innovators, I noticed that there is no platform where I can find in one place all the information that I need in order to patent my innovation. I saw that there isn't also a platform where I could find all the profiles from innovators in Bosnia and Herzegovina, since I have noticed that they are winning so many medals when they are going to the competition and etc. Also, because I wanted to patent my innovation, I was searching for educations, for trainings in this area of the intellectual property, but then I noticed that there are no education about it, and that I would need to possibly hire a patent attorney. Since at that point of time I was studying, I didn't have enough money to pay the patent attorney, so I decided to patent my innovation on my own. When it comes to the support of Bosnian innovators, there are only 2 ministries that publish a public call once in a year. I was also searching for those public calls to see if I can have some funds in order to protect my invention. But then I noticed that those funds that we can apply for are not really enough so we could protect or patent our inventions. Then I was searching more about the Global Innovation Index just to see where exactly is Bosnia and Herzegovina when it comes to Global Innovation Index. And I was really sad to see that from 131 economies, we ranked 74th. And the main weaknesses were research and development, university and industry research collaboration is really low, and really low we ranked in intellectual property payments. So as I became the member of Inventors Association of Bosnia and Herzegovina and talking to other innovators, I saw that most often they make the same mistakes that I made with my innovation. The first mistake that most innovators do is they do not search the patent database, and they automatically think that their idea is automatically innovation and it can be patented. Because in front of the Center for Civil Society Promotion, we are implementing the project Treasury of Bosnia and Herzegovina Innovations. We had the opportunity to see inventions from other innovators, and they are looking for funds that we are giving to them. And just by, I don't know, searching the keywords from their inventions, we were able to see that those inventions already exists. So that is the first common mistake that our inventors do. The second common mistakes that our inventors do is that they do not know how to clearly explain the patent claims. For example, when I was writing the patent application, I was so obsessed to write every dimension of my invention. And after some time, I was able to talk with some patent attorney, and they said to me that it's not necessary to write the exact dimensions of my invention, because some other person can, for example, protect the same invention and just to give other dimensions that I didn't wrote on my patent application. The third common mistake that most innovators do is that they do not know the difference between an inventor and an applicant or person who is filling the patent application. So this was almost my mistake, because I was in one incubator in Bosnia and Herzegovina, and after that, because I was talking a lot about my innovation, I had the opportunity to talk with a lot of investors. But one of the investors said to me that they like my invention and that they would like to protect my invention, to pay all that it needs to be patented, and they said that they will do that to fill the patent application and everything, and that my name will be that I'm an inventor. But when I went to the Institute of the Intellectual Property of Bosnia and Herzegovina, they said to me that the whole patent will then become in their hands, not in my hands, no matter that I'm inventor or not. So that was my experience that I had. So then I rushed and protected my invention by myself. And the fourth most common mistakes that our inventors do is that they expose their invention to the public, and then they harm their innovation, because they after that they can't protect it. So the one thing that is also frustrating to me is that, for example, the scientific research work in Bosnia and Herzegovina, that is a special topic that confuses me, because in public calls related to scientific research issued by some certain ministries, only higher education institutions, research centers can apply for funds. The inventor innovator, an individual can't apply on those public calls. Why? Because the status of innovator is not mentioned in the laws on scientific research. And that was so confusing to me, because when I was researching about who is filling and applying for patent protection, I saw that 90% of filled patent application here in Bosnia are from the individuals innovators. And I was also sad about it to see that individual innovator, no matter that if he has so many patents protected, if he has won so many medals, he can't apply for scientific research just because the status of innovator is not mentioned as scientific research. So not to only talk about the problems that I have mentioned, I wanted to do something and to see how I, as an individual, can help to all the innovators in Bosnia and Herzegovina, and to have small steps to help innovators in Bosnia and Herzegovina. And that is why we have created the mentioned project, Treasury of Bosnia and Herzegovina Innovations, where we were able to create a platform, Inovacije.ba, where we have all the profiles for all innovators in Bosnia and Herzegovina, where all investors can approach to them, because there is a database with their emails. On that platform, you can find how to protect your invention, and we had also educations and tutorials about how to do patent research, how to fill the patent application, and that is all placed on our YouTube channel. But these are really, really small steps that are done for our innovators, because the main problem for most innovators is also that they, for example, can't create their inventions, for example, their prototypes. For my invention, my team and I, for 1 year, we were searching a company that would create 2 prototypes that we needed to do. And there were just no company in Bosnia and Herzegovina. We were doing meetings, we were going everywhere, and it was just, we couldn't find a company that would create a prototype. And eventually, after 1 year, we found out one company in other country, and we finally created our prototype. Also, some research that we needed to do about my invention, the antibacterial analysis. There was just no institute that could do that because they don't have resources or etc. And I was really facing a lot of challenges just to do research, just to do a prototype, and just to convince other people that my prototype really works. So this was in 2016, and just in last year, in 2020, I was able to do the antimicrobiological analysis and to do other improvements on my prototype. So I think that the main thing is also that needs to be changed is that we need to work on raising awareness about how much important is intellectual property, just like John and Peter said, that the economical growth is based on the innovations. I would not agree that we don't have innovators. In Bosnia, we have more than 400 innovators, and Inventors Association of Bosnia and Herzegovina has won 1,730 awards from all around the world. In 2019, for example, I went in Seoul, and 30 countries were competing in the best innovation and my innovation, a little innovation from a little country called Bosnia and Herzegovina, at that point of time won a semi-grand prize. So, and I'm not the only example. There are so many innovators, women innovators, that have really, really great inventions, and patents. But I think. I feel that we came back from all those competitions with medals. Other countries are see how good our inventions are. We came back with the medals. There are some articles, media that are writing about it, but the final thing for innovation is to commercialize it, to finally produce it, and that is a really hard part that we need to work on. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you, Nadia. Now we know a little bit more why Bosnia is lagging behind Europe, but the question is, which was addressed in Peter's presentation as well, and in the last issue of London-based Economist, why Europe is lagging behind the United States. Perhaps John and Krisztina can try to answer.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
And the question is, why is Europe lacking behind the U.S. in innovation? You know, I think there is a very important factor that benefits the United States, which is often overlooked. And that is that it has inherited a British common law tradition. If you look at the economic growth of all of the countries in aggregate which have inherited British common law traditions, they are the former members of the British Commonwealth of Nations, and would include Canada, the United States. Well, actually, the U.S. was never part of the British Commonwealth because that was, I believe, created later. But the ones that have inherited these traditions are New Zealand, Singapore, Australia, and so forth. These countries as a whole have enjoyed 0.5% per year greater growth in GDP per capita over the last 2 centuries than the countries that have inherited Napoleonic European civil law traditions, namely the former colonies of France, Spain, Germany, and Portugal. And so it's interesting to look at why, or what is it about common law which is so advantageous for economic growth? Well, common law emerges from the bottom up, for the most part. It does not. It is not a top-down legal tradition, as was the case with Napoleonic civil law. You have juries and judges who try to determine for every dispute that arises what the best resolution is for the litigants involved. And this body of law then, the aggregate of all of these cases becomes the case history, and that becomes the body of law. So the body of law emerges and evolves with the society, the economy, and technology, as opposed to being from the top down by say a Congress or a parliament or a president or a dictator. And so every country today, including the US and the UK, use a mix of bottom-up common law and top-down civil law. But the countries that have the greatest use of common law in that mix are the ones that have enjoyed the highest economic growth. So I don't know to what extent Bosnia could possibly adopt greater use of common law. But I've written an article about this in detail. It's on my website. It's at johnchisholmventures.com/regulation, all lowercase, and you can find the article there. think about how Bosnia could take advantage of that. I offer some specific recommendations in both the article and the Appendix E of my book that I mentioned to create environments that are more receptive to entrepreneurship, innovation, and economic growth. And there are things like having lots of experiments in the law. If you implement something, implement it for just a region rather than the whole country or the whole continent, and that way and review the effect of it, if possible, to the extent possible after some period of time. Make sure every law has to be revisited after a certain length of time, every 3 to 5 years, perhaps. And if it doesn't if it's not achieving what it's intended to, then don't renew it. Make sure that ideally no law should exceed about 100 pages. If it's more than that, people won't read it and they won't be able to anticipate the unintended consequences. So keep them brief, simple, and predictable, and so forth. So those are a few thoughts.
Thank you, John. No, Krisztina, sorry. There is a better question for you. Many years ago, when George Stigler, a Nobel Prize laureate, raised this question, it was very strange. But these days, there are many people who are protecting monopoly rights. But actually, I will let you what the question is. The question is, patents tend to create bureaucratic structures, both on the levels of the government, regulation, patent offices, etc., and business research, legal departments, additional research. In the worst case, this can lead to the less innovation and dynamism. Are there better ways to protect intellectual property? Krisztina?
Thank you, Vjekoslav. And I do want to, elaborate a bit on the previous question, because I think it's very important to highlight how regulations affect innovation. And this goes back, to Peter's point that the role of government is important, but it needs to be limited. And what we tend to do, we tend to regulate technologies before understanding how they work. And we see this with a lot of regulations that are popping up, especially in Europe. And I gave the example of the GDPR, but there are many others. And not just in Europe. John talked about, the exodus from California and Silicon Valley. Part of that is the regulations over there. So because when they're thought about, they largely target large tech companies, but it doesn't discriminate. So it disproportionately also affects small companies and startups by placing additional burdens on them. And again, I did mention and emphasize the effect on investments and on startups, but strict regulations can also negatively impact consumer choice and scientific research. And this is something that is a lot of the times overseen. So, and then back to your other question. I did mention in the beginning of my presentation that, yes, intellectual property is a very necessary but not sufficient condition. And what is the role of government in that? The government needs to provide a robust IP system that, because it is a significant factor in setting the foundations of the innovation activity. But there needs to be a strategy to develop the local intellectual property capabilities. This is something that Nadia actually emphasized. Innovation can and does happen pretty much anywhere. And we do see innovators in lower income countries stepping up to solve very important health and social challenges. But the question is always, how do we scale it up so that everyone can benefit? So providing those incentives for the entrepreneurs, I think it's very important. I mean, again, this is not the only benefit of having a robust IP system, but it's also, I mean, again, it's vital for generating capital, and it also facilitates cooperation. We've seen that with all the voluntary licensing agreements that allowed manufacturing of COVID-19 vaccines. So Merck, when one of the example was Merck collaborating with Janssen Pharmaceutical to produce the J&J vaccine in the United States.
Thank you, Krisztina. Another question from audience, specifically for John. In general, what are some of the biggest regulatory legislative roadblocks to natural growth of innovation system?
Well, Scott, there are a myriad of roadblocks, and it varies from industry, from geography, and size of company. But let me just mention one which is fairly broad and applicable to any company just getting off the ground, and that is worker status law. In the US, at least, worker status law is the law which determines whether a worker is a contractor or an employee. Contractors are essential for startups. I know this by virtue of having founded 2 companies, co-founded a third, and sold a fourth. When you're just starting out, you don't have much in the way of resources. You want to hire people for as much as you can afford and as much as they're available. It might be just a few hours a week or one day a week. But as you grow and get established, perhaps get some funding or some revenue from customers, then you can keep that person on for 2 days a week, 3 days a week, 4 days a week, and maybe bring them to full time at some point, hopefully. So it is an essential part of getting a company started to be able to treat individuals as contractors. It simplifies things hugely for the entrepreneur because I don't have to worry about payroll taxes and employment compensation, Social Security. I could go on and on. I just have to pay my bill to the contractor, and then he or she is responsible for all the rest. Well, contracting has just come under attack in the U.S. Some people don't feel it's fair for people to be contractors and not enjoy all of these benefits like unemployment compensation, Social Security, healthcare, and so forth. In spite of the fact that many people, and I think it's fair to say most contractors, do it because they like to do it. They enjoy the flexibility. They're their own boss. They can work whatever hours they want and so forth. Well, by making it harder and harder to have contractors, and this is not talked about very much, it is negatively impacting new business formation. Here in California, there's an even worse law, which is AB 5, Assembly Bill 5, which extends the inability to have contractors to many companies. And that was partially overturned by a ballot measure that Uber and Lyft put on to enable them to continue to hire contractors as drivers. And those incredibly effective, pervasive new technologies and ways of doing business that would transform the taxi service would not exist if it hadn't been for contractors. Same with lots of other new businesses. So anyway, that's one example of if there's anything Bosnia can do to keep contractors as contractors in Bosnia and not burden entrepreneurs with all of the other stuff, that will help new company formation. I also wanted to talk about the other question that Martin raises about many patents are really creating bureaucratic structures. And a book that talks about the pros and cons of patents, I think very effectively, is this book right here by Matt Ridley called How Innovation Works. Maybe you've seen it. It just came out about, I don't know, 4 to 6 months ago. I wrote a review of it on Amazon. You'll see it there very positively. And here, Matt talks about the really ambiguous role that patents have played net in terms of promoting regulation. Yes, they have some advantages, but they also have some key disadvantages, which is people get patents on new technologies that they never productize and then just sue other people who do productize that technology and interfere with their businesses. So that's obviously counterproductive. And yes, I think you ask, is there a better way to do it? And I think there must be a better way. And I think that's some of our patent IP experts here on this panel could probably tell us about that. One thing that is very evident to me is that the pace of innovation is inexorably increasing as one idea can more readily piggyback off of another idea. And we have high-speed communication, transport, we have search on the internet that we didn't have 25 years ago previously. All of these things enable ideas to be combined, and as Matt Ridley likes to say, innovation is ideas having sex with each other. So because of the increased pace of innovation, it's ever more likely that within the span that your patent is applicable, say 20 years, someone else would have come up with the same innovation. And so it seems to me, at a minimum, the length of time of a patent should fall systematically by a predictable amount, maybe 10% every decade. So perhaps going down by, from 20 years to 18 years to 17 years or what have you. Now, I'm well aware that at the same time, regulatory hurdles are growing, especially in, say, pharmaceuticals, that require that for the first few years, and maybe the first 10 years, you're going through clinical trials. You can't even bring that to market. And so the growing regulatory obstacles are putting pressure in the other direction. And that, of course, is limiting how many new pharmaceuticals can come to market. So if we can do something to reduce these in parallel, reduce the regulatory obstacles and the length of the patent, that would be optimal. Now, that's a very daunting task to ask of any government, but that's a framework to think about the problem. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, John. Nadia raised the issue of number of innovators in Bosnia and Herzegovina. We can perhaps address this issue. Perhaps according to administrative data, Bosnia has innovators, but according to perhaps Peter's criteria, Peter said that it's necessary to turn innovation into money. So the question is,
Yes.
how many of these BH investors, innovators, manage to turn their innovations into money? Just some thoughts about it.
Yes. Well, that is the problem. We have innovators, we have inventions, we go to the competitions, we come back in our country with the medals, and we can see about it in the media. And I think that is like the beginning and the end of the inventions in Bosnia. Unfortunately, when it comes to investors, I see that they are really not interested in investing in inventions in Bosnia. Some of the investors that I had the opportunity to talk, they said to me that Bosnia isn't the country that they would like to invest some big amount of money to build a company in the country that is not really for them, how would I say, secure. They offered to me, for example, I'm talking from my experience and from the experience of other innovators. They were like they wanted from my innovation to buy it, but I know from my example and from example of other innovators that when they want to buy the innovation that is patented, they are offering often a little amount of money, which is, I think, it's not enough that I would like to sell my invention. For example, for my innovation, they offered me $15,000. And then I said to them that I have already invested $15,000 just by doing the research, patenting invention, creating prototypes, doing the research, creating a video, commercial, animation, technical documentation, and everything that I needed to do. That is the all challenges that we are facing. There are inventions, but most of them, unfortunately, they don't become a product that is producing and which you can buy it. So, for example, for my innovation, I will try to do a crowdfunding campaign. We have already created a video. And on September or October, we will see that we will place a crowdfunding campaign on Kickstarter or Indiegogo, just to see if people are really interested. And then if we collect the amount that we need, and we need a lot of it, we will see if we could create a company or I don't know, to sell to other company, but then to see to have a percentage of the sold invention that is our invention.
Thank you, Nadia. An excellent question.
Thank you.
For Krisztina. The IT sector, blockchain, decentralization, and some parts of medicine, biotech, is moving so fast that they are outpacing all regulatory efforts. How important are these sectors for innovation?
They are very important. They're actually
Yes.
crucial and critical.
Yes.
And that is my point. We tend to regulate all these technologies before understanding them. And in that, we tend to forget that doing so, it has costs and trade-offs, and usually it's the consumers that they don't get access to the benefits of these new technologies. I mean, we do need to remember that there are several new technologies that actually evolved outside the traditional regulatory system. So think of Skype and Uber, right? But again, we do. So I'm not saying we don't need laws and regulations. We do. I mean, consumers still need to be protected from cybersecurity threats and privacy and
Yes.
other protections. But I think it would be more efficient and beneficial, and that's for everyone, whether it's consumers and innovators and companies, if legislators and regulators would just work together with the industry to develop those rules and develop clear rules and standards that everyone can follow.
Thank you,
If
Krisztina. Yes.
if I may just embellish
Yes,
that,
please,
that's
please,
a
John.
good point. Take
Yes.
drones, for example, as a specific example. Exciting new technology with many applications for security, transportation, transport, you name it. But yet there's relatively little commercial use of drones anywhere in the US or Europe currently. They're still primarily a hobbyist activity. Well, why is that? Well, look at the Federal Aviation Administration's regulations for drones. They have to be well away from airports, only up to 400 feet in altitude, only within visual sight of the operator, which means they can't be used at night. An operator may operate only one drone at a time. It's only during daylight hours, only for non-commercial purposes, unless you have a waiver. Well, wow, how restrictive is that? You can't even test a drone on private property. Maybe you can now, but for much of the last decade, it hasn't been allowed. So what's an alternative way that drones could be regulated? Well, just rather than try to anticipate in advance all the problems that are likely to arise, wait until they do arise and then address them as they arise. This is the whole idea of common law as opposed to statutory or civil law. Common law does not try to anticipate all the issues and disputes that could arise. It just deals with them as they arise. So, okay, so a drone lands on somebody's property, destroys some crops, hurts somebody, then you have a dispute, and it can be addressed in a court of law, and then judges can hark to precedent. So it's well established for hundreds of years, dangerous animal laws. If you own an animal, like a snake or a tiger, that's dangerous and does harm to somebody, you are responsible. The same principle could apply to drones. Drones can carry cameras, which can turn them into peeping toms. That has also been disallowed by common law for hundreds of years. Peeping Tom laws disallow people from peeking into somebody's window or photographing or videoing more recently without permission. So there's plenty of legal structure that we could be using that's much more flexible, adaptable, and would not hold back the adoption of new technologies like drones and autonomous vehicles, if we would just let it. This is the theme of my article. I put it in the chat. Maybe somebody could copy and paste it into the general chat so everyone can have the link. It's called Drones, Dangerous Animals, and Peeping Toms, Impact of Imposed versus Organic Regulation on Entrepreneurship, Innovation, and Economic Growth. Thanks.
Thank you, John. Krisztina, John, and Nadia, what is the main message that you would like the audience to take away? Krisztina, Nadia, and John.
Okay, sure. So again, I do want to reiterate the fact that a robust IP system is a critical factor, but it's not the only factor. Both John and Nadia already talked about the need for infrastructure, the need for partnerships between academia, government, and private sector. There needs to be, John pointed to all the regulatory barriers. So we need to remove those regulatory barriers, especially for starting new businesses and other permitting restrictions. And last but not least, a national regulatory framework to conform with the generally accepted international standards. I think these are all crucial, but we need to think about it. So we cannot think about this dynamic innovative climate in silos, because it's not so. For example, a modern IP protection system will not be solely conducive to an innovative environment. In the same way, universities cannot reinvigorate economies on their own, right? So, and the regulations, again, they don't function in a vacuum. So we need, a comprehensive framework that is informed by the partnerships between government, academia, and the private sector.
Thank you. Nadia.
Yes, I would like to say to all the participants that are listening to us that everyone can be an innovator, and there is one myth that everyone thinks that you need to be a genius to become an innovator, but that is not true. The statistics says that only 2% of inventions are pioneering inventions. And the 75% of the inventions are the inventions that had some minor upgrade of the inventions that have already exist. So to everyone who is now who now has some idea in their heads, just go for it, because the only obstacles are the obstacles that we have in our heads.
Thank you, Nadia. When genius is mentioned, there is a very famous statement by Schopenhauer. Talent hits a target no one else can hit. Genius hits a target no one else can see. John, your final words.
Wonderful. Well, I so love what Nada and Krisztina have just said for their summary remarks, especially this observation that anyone can be a innovator just by combining things that each of us know in novel ways. Innovation is largely a process of combining things we already know, and each of us has a unique set of things that we know. Think of something that's a very worthwhile exercise. Make a list. I call it a stars chart of your skills that you know about, technologies, assets and achievements, relationships, reputation, and strengths, as in inner strengths. This is right out of my book. It spells the word stars with 2 A's and 2 R's. This is all the resources that you have at your disposal as a potential entrepreneur. Write down all of the skills you have, technologies you know about, and so forth. And then look for combinations that might be novel and try to find a customer need that those might address. And chances are quite possible that you are the best person in the world to combine that particular combination of things. So that's one thing. We need lots of entrepreneurs, and everybody listening is a potential entrepreneur to create innovation ecosystems in Bosnia. The other thing we need is a conducive environment and climate for entrepreneurship. And for that, the single metric that I think is most useful, the single tool, is the World Bank Ease of Doing Business Index. Think about how you can cut your rank in half from 90 to 45 in the next 3 years, and then go all the way to number 1 for the long term.
It seems, John, that we have some technical problems.
Okay.
Okay, now it's okay.
You said that we will become number 1. That is the most important.
Okay. We can wrap up with that. Since we are almost out of time, I would like to wrap up. According to The Economist, the most important question in economics is also the hardest. Why do some countries stay poor while others grow rich? This evening, we have offered an answer: understanding and harnessing the power of creative destruction, innovation that disrupts, that over the past 200 years has lifted societies to previously unimagined prosperity. I would like to thank to the Austria Economic Center for organizing this event. Our thanks go especially to its technical staff for making this event feasible, particularly in my case. I would like particularly to thank Peter, our keynote speaker, and to John, Krisztina, and Nadia for sharing their time and views with us. Thank you, John, Krisztina, and Nadia, for answering all questions raised and for the great presentations. It was a great pleasure to have you with us. Thank you all for attending. We hope you have learned and enjoyed these presentations. The following event, Innovative East Regulated West, is to be organized the following day by University of Donja Gorica, our old partner and friend. Goodbye and have a nice evening.